Hey y'all, welcome back to this episode of Will and Jerod Make a New Game! Whee! That is, at least tentatively speaking, still the name, I guess, of what we're co-doing here through podcast feed for me, YouTube channel for Jerod. I hope his recording is showing him on the same side of the screen as he is on mine, so I'm actually pointing at him like a Brady Bunch intro. Hopefully.
Unfortunately, I'm bunk bed style on my side. Sorry. I'm a bunk bed.
Ah, shucks. Well, regardless, dear listeners, I am Will here from Gamenomicon and my co-host, Jerod.
Hey, I'm Jerod Leopold. I run and own, I guess. I don't know how to do this yet. For Paroxysm by Design, uh, publishes games and a writer. And yeah, Will and I are working on a new game to be published through Gamenomicon, his publishing house. And yeah, that's what we're doing here, folks.
Yeah. For anybody that's tuning in late in the game here, we're a few episodes deep, but we are looking at kicking around a new game, new setting, and everything based on the second guess. I'm saying the wrong SRD. Based on the Tension engine, which powered Party First, Gamenomicon's first game, one that Jerod's done a bunch of writing and playing in as well. So we are working through our process of ground up for you listeners as we kick around ideas, see what sticks and what doesn't. So, one thing in particular, I would really highlight that people check out the episode before this one, where we walk through the Tension Engine system resource document and kind of talk about various things it features, what makes it click, and how some of the different things interlock with each other. Because I think that episode is going to be very pertinent for today's episode, where we are going to be talking about kind of tweaks, updates, things that we already know that we do want to keep the same, things that we're looking at updating. In the initial game in Party First, there are some aspects that tie in, I think, very closely to that particular setting that may or may not work here. We may want to make some changes to tie in more closely to this setting as we flesh it out. So this is the episode we're going to kick that stuff around, and I know Jerod has already got some stuff that he's kind of sketching out. I've got at least one I'm kind of kicking around. So this is going to be the first we really talk about this in depth, folks. We've given maybe a couple bullet points to each other before this, so we'll see how this goes. I guarantee this is not going to be the end of our thoughts on the process, but this is the opening salvo.
Yeah, and I
Jerod,
really,
what you? Oh, go ahead.
yeah, absolutely. For what you said on where you finished there, is that definitely want to put this like the mechanics, like we talked about in episode 2, the setting, and that should really be like setting 1.0. Then this one should be like mechanics 1.0 because it's going to be an evolving process. In I can never say this enough, so I'm going to keep saying it until people shout it from the rooftops, baby. Is the idea of marrying your mechanics with the setting. It's something I didn't realize that I admire and that I really want to strive for in my own design space until I've gotten over the past couple of years really looking at other games. Is that those are the games that I admire and that I'm impressed by the most. So before we start talking about the mechanics that we want to tinker with, just a quick overview. The game that we're thinking about
Oh, good
is
call.
Three Musketeers in Space, basically. Where I'd like to do a little bit more political intrigue. We want to go for a more hopeful aspect of the game. It's not going to be like a horror doom and gloom sort of thing, not trapped in this thing. It's going to be more about negotiating peaceful contracts between governments. It's going to be about exploring new planets. It's going to be exploring different social interactions between two different species, perhaps. And it's going to be all about trying to keep the peace for a harmonious future of this space world that's loosely based on 1700s France.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that said, though, I'm sure. I guess maybe we didn't really hit on this, but I'm sure combat and conflict will still be a large piece of things, right? I can't imagine the Three Musketeers without imagining some swashbuckling sword fights.
100%. I want dueling to be one of the government ways to settle disagreements. So yeah, absolutely. Those are going to be your normal swashbuckling stuff. We're talking about a little bit more of the, like I said, the hopeful, the high adventure, the high stakes. I don't want to fight just because you can fight. I want to be able to fight for a good reason on there. So it's the setting that we're aiming for. It is sci-fi. There's going to be something like the force that's involved, so there's going to be some like kind of magical elements to it. And also cyber hacking that we haven't really got into that much yet. I want it to exist. Don't know how we're gonna do it yet.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's the setting. Now this is the episode then that we take a look at the mechanics for what we want to update. I have two lists here,
Okay.
and one is listed for update, and the other one is for goals. So if you've already listened to the episode right before this one, episode 4, where we talk about the SRD for the tension engine, then you'll know what I'm talking about here. So the first thing that I want to look at for updates is that in my gaming, I know that my group is more mechanic orientated versus narrative orientated.
Mhm.
So they generate lots of tension points. They like to roll a lot of dice. They want to have their skills and their attributes to push the story forward. They also do a good job of doing narratively as well. But they come from the idea that their characters either know more or know less than they do in real life. So they want their characters to solve it rather than to get to the puzzles for it. So there's a lot of tension points that I get with the game master, and I want to uh, update that in some way. I think that's just something that I want to change.
Sure.
The it Yeah. How about you? What are your experiences with that?
That is one when we've been talking over the last couple of years about party first stuff that has kind of fascinated me between our different groups when playtesting the initial party first down here with a couple different groups. I think we hit a much more I hate to say narrative focused because like that happens with everything, but I think we definitely were less focused on pushing roles to do various things, um, which has pluses and minuses in the system, so to speak. So I think that has always fascinated me that tension has pushed so much higher in your games. And I admit that, I have thought before that it would be interesting to um, flip things, so to speak, and I haven't, right? Like, so we tested the Kickstarter exclusive adventure for Twilight First together. I GM'd that. Jerod and a few other folks from the Gamenomicon Discord servers were in that. So I think he got a good perspective of how that was often going when I was running. I felt like that game was more in line with my prior experiences testing. I admit I have not had the opportunity, or at least haven't pushed hard for to go the other direction and for me to be in one of Jerod's games with his group and his GMing, and kind of see how that has gone. So that's probably a weakness that we should rectify as we're going forward with the new game. But more specifically to the question you asked, not the backstory on it. Yeah, I mean, I'd be very open to tweaks on that. I mean, this is total spitballing, throwing things out there. One of the simplest things that jumps out at me is a cap maybe on total tension, or a full reset. Once tension breaks, it drops all the way back down to the starting value, which I don't think we actually hit when going through the SRD, but I recommend that tension floor be at 2 rather than 0, so that the environment always gets to roll something.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I am looking at a couple different ways if we want to talk about the things we're looking at.
Yeah.
To cap. So yeah, in my home game playing with those guys is that the environment is capped at 10 always, because we'll reach that. We'll get to 50 or 60 tension points. Now, that's how many that we've
Moderate.
gotten.
I think I hit 20 once.
uh, but no, I want like we go on longer adventures, right? Like those adventures are gonna be like maybe 4 to 5 hour get-togethers. Um, and that's not how much I get. I'll end the game with like 20, right? Because I'll be spending as we go along. But 20 is
Right.
still too many, really, because that means every time they want to deal with the environment, it's an automatic 10 roll, which is impossible to beat unless you're spending points. But the only way to get points, and you just get into this cycle, right? So
Yeah.
that's one thing I want to look at for us. Uh, So now the second update I'm looking at is a better onboarding process. And this is probably more for goals, not an update to it, because there isn't really anything on there. But a
Onboarding
way,
like character creation, or
yes, 100%. I want a smoother character creation into the game itself that makes a little bit of sense, that also describes the setting that they're in. And the right now we just start the game like each of the characters gets a party or gets an adventure point, as it were, and then the game master starts at 0. You're right; it should probably start at 2. Um, but if we can do a little bit of onboarding, like talk about their characters, get those relationships formed a little bit earlier. The only reason I'm bringing this up because in the past couple of years I've gotten to play some great games like Monster of the Week does a very simple way. My favorite is Worldwide Wrestling, where the relationships that you build before you get into the game mechanically affects how the game goes. And that
okay.
is a beautiful marriage of setting and um, in mechanics. You can't do it in every game because that's called in that game is heat, and that's how your like wrestling matches go, right? So
Okay. I have not played either one of those, but I have done Smallville. I don't know if you've done that, but it definitely has a lot of kind of session 0 as a piece of character building. You're also building a relationship web and establishing locations around town, and you're building up the supporting cast of a CW show, basically, right? And how everything kind of works together. So it sounds kind of in the realm of the sort of thing you're talking about.
yep, yeah, absolutely. And that's probably more for a goal rather than an update to the mechanics.
I
The
mean,
third
I
thing,
think that makes sense to include with mechanics, like some sort of guidance on that feels like a mechanical system. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, okay, the third thing I'll look at, and this is so simple, it's so easy. This is just from playing Party first so much, is they call them party points in personal points, or like personal checks versus party checks versus. There's too many P's. It's just changing the
Yeah.
naming convention. That's it. No big difference.
Totally makes sense. When Brett and I were working originally on Party First, we liked the alliteration, and it gave us a nice little chuckle. But that's definitely something that would probably be tweaked in a second edition, especially once like you're in a chat or something and you start abbreviating things. Oh man, everything's PP. This gets confusing.
Yeah, that's really just a minor tweak. Right now for the mechanics, at least in Party First, it is to get a success, you have to be above the number of difficulty. I would like to change that to be more in line with other games that I've played, where it's you either match or be above it to be successful on the check. It's a minor change, but I think philosophically, an important one.
Yeah, I think that is about matching the tone, and listeners, this is one we chatted briefly about before we started recording. I'm totally on board with that. I know there's another change Jerod's looking at that I think hooks into this, but to go ahead and say, I think tone wise, the system, of course, was originally created for a horror game, right? So it makes sense that difficulty wise and kind of in a game wide sense, you are rounding down, and anything that kind of could give a higher edge to the players generally leans the other direction, gives the edge to adversaries or the environment. If we want this more hopeful tone, this more swashbuckling positive thing, it totally makes sense to me to go ahead. Like you said, it's a small tweak to make it meet or beat, but that just sets the tone of rounding upward. Everything just slightly favors going the other direction. That I think is going to change the feel in a way that matches the setting better.
Yep, and you're exactly right. This leads into my last one, which I thought of another one I'm going to add on after this. But right now, at least for Party First, that's the one I've played the most of. That's my touchstone for most of this. Is that when you roll ones during certain checks, that's how you produce tension points. I'd like to change it for this game, which tentatively you can see it on screen here. Tentatively, we're calling Unity. To go like for the all for one type of feel of the Three Musketeers. So I'm going to reverse it. So the game master gets tension points whenever the players roll a 6. So the more successful they are, the more things that you give to the game master. Because as the Party First is, the more ones you roll, you're probably failing, and you're giving more attention to the game master to play with to make future things harder as well. So you ended up in this kind of downward spiral. For this game, I want it to be more of a leveling mechanic. So if you're doing really well, that means I can throw a little bit more at the players. And if you're doing poorly, I'm like, well, you know what? I don't need to make it worse for you guys right now. You're having a bad enough time as it is.
Right. No, I like that as well. Again, it's what I was saying about fitting the tone, the genre of what you're going for. That downward spiral makes sense in horror. It makes less sense in a more just adventure setting. One thing that does spring to mind with that I'm that's related, and so I'm kind of curious what your thought is. So in the failure sense, like base rules, it does kind of have that downward spiral, and I think it is something that maybe discourages repeated kind of fruitless rolls. I mean, and there is another piece of that where if you fail at something, you can attempt it again, but every time you fail, it adds one to tension in Base Party First. That was intended to work together with that, so that, like, say you're trying to, I don't know, pick a lock on a door or something. Yes, you can attempt it, like in kind of that movie beat sense. You know, sometimes the players give it another try, or the characters in the movie, and they're able to do it the second time and get through, and it just builds that narrative tension and those stakes. But from a game sense, they you don't want people to just bog down doing it over and over and over forever. So tension kind of ratchets upward. Poor rolls then in the initial one generate more tension, which potentially pushes it even faster. Do you see that it might cause issue? I and sorry, that phrasing "do you see" makes it seem like, oh, I'm dead set on this and you're an idiot. That is not how I meant it.
Yeah,
It was a, do you envision that there would be an issue there? Do you think there's not an issue? Do you think that's kind of a, hey, let's play test some and see if that turns out to be an issue? Kind of, what are you thinking?
I think it's going to come down to play testing. I 100% agree with you as far as one of the lamest things that I don't like in role playing games. There's two things that you run into here. One, frivolous checks, right? Either you can do it or not do it. Um, Gumshoe does a good job of, like, if you're doing an investigation, let's say like in some games you miss the investigation check, you just kind of dead end, right? The adventure bogs down and you got to do something else. Gumshoe, they just give it to you. You still make an investigation check because you can get more. You can get your hands on more information to go either get more information about the bad guy or whatever narratively. Um, so I don't want frivolous rolls, right? But I still need to get tension points. So there's that. Now the second thing that I said that I really don't like in role playing games is, oh, you failed it. We'll just check again, right? The repeated checks over and over again. Now in this game, weirdly enough, we could do that because both the player and the GM are still getting something out of this, right? They're both building
Right.
pools for future narrative use. However, that's not fun, right? No one's having a great time doing that. So I am introducing something later on that I hope addresses this. But as of right now,
Okay.
if you're doing an individual check and you want to do it again, I'm going to make you spend points to do it. I think that's fair. I'm,
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
fine with making it
Thinking.
harder if you keep failing trying to do the same thing. Um, Now, that being said, we'll get to some goals in my next list. Now, for something that I want to change, well, we're talking about it now. I guess we should just talk about it. I want so a way to navigate this. One of my goals is that I want the group check, the party checks, to be um, encouraged because we are trying to push for
Yeah.
this like unity aspect. This Three Musketeers is that yes. Here's my proposal. Check this out.
Okay.
Okay, so we set it up the same. So everyone's gonna roll on this check. Like, oh, do you hear something? If everyone's there and can participate, you can all make a group check. And you do the same thing where the it's gonna be like an investigation skill. Whoever's lowest, that's who you roll on. But everyone rolls, and the game master puts a number on it. Um, we'll talk about environment scaling in the next part, but everyone gets to roll. All you need to succeed is one successful roll. Every
Okay.
fail that you get, I get a tension point, but every success you get beyond the first one, you get bonus information. And it's a
Okay.
way to build up unity points as well, or like group points, I should say.
Yeah.
Um, so if everyone's trying to do something really hard, well, probably don't do that because you'll probably fail. But if you only need one success, but you're doing it on your party skill, so I think there's going to be some balance issues here. I think, in a good way, is that when
Yeah.
you do a group check, do group checks like on your investigation. However, if you get down to in the hallway, someone has to pick this lock right now, and it's difficult. You still need the individual to do that.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I'm hoping for. That's my goal.
Yeah. I'm just kind of processing, kicking it around. I had not put a fine kind of mechanical point or thought in it in particular, but I'm very much in agreement in the broad strokes that I had already been thinking about. If this is musketeers and kind of all for one, one for all, that something in the party stuff that in back up slightly, in party first, the party stuff is framed as kind of a necessary evil, so to speak. Everybody is kind of hobbled at normal times unless they need to spend or choose to spend resources in order to allow themselves to personally excel, basically. And I don't think that type of kind of framing works as well for the one for all for one type of thing. So reframing, re-incentivizing the group stuff in a more positive light. I mean, I still want individual characters to have the capability to shine in a duel or whatever it might be, but the group unity stuff being framed in a positive mechanical sense, more so than just doing it. You earn some points later. Like I think that would be a good angle.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really excited to explore for sure. Also, the idea of the more successes you get, the more that you get out of it as well. Um,
Yeah.
but so
Speaking of
that's a goal
success,
of mine.
yeah,
That's
go
really
ahead.
cool. Going back
Um,
to yes,
I was just say, speaking of successes, not a deep thought here, but that might be an angle for us to play with on the group stuff, right? That that maybe the generation of successes or unity points or adventure points, what however naming winds up going here, um, is um, is tweaked in this game. That we handle it a different way. In Party First, that is the base way that you do it. You elect to take the party role at the lower skill and get a point in return for doing that as your payment. So maybe that's a lever we look at tweaking that. Maybe we move that reward that to successes or something. I don't know. Again, not not a fully formed thought, but just maybe that's a piece that we could kind of turn around a different direction.
yep. We can even use like the players, the highest skill from the players involved too. I want to check that out as far as a play test. On
Yeah,
the jump
give them
is that my
incentive
favorite?
to like stick together.
Yeah, like on the jump is that my favorite? No, but
Yeah,
maybe it's awesome. Maybe it is way because they're still gonna be rolling different dice because their attributes are different. And then if you
right.
make it like, okay, yeah, this is a group check. This is a way too large of a project to get done by one person, but you have to get two successes for it to work. You can, there's a lot of things to play with. I don't want to get bogged down on it because I don't want to make these conflicts like written out as like six different things you have to know. But group checks being more important in this game for sure. Now that does bring me back to something real quick that I wanted to make an update for this game that Party First does, and that is how you're describing how the tension tables get triggered. I know this is something where you and I have talked about in my home game. So we have changed it to this, is that instead of, I keep track of two pools of tension points that I've gained and tension points that I've spent. Now,
Hmm.
the tension table only triggers on every 10th tension point that I get. Now, from the way that I talk about it, is like we'll get between, like I said, 40 to 60 tension points. We're doing longer adventures. They want to do a lot more checks and all that stuff. And so that makes sense that I don't go back below to then re-trigger it. The table's going to trigger a lot already. The other thing is, I know narratively, no game master should get to 11, spend 2 tension points, knowing that those 2 tension points they spent are going to make the characters have to do a check that'll probably give them back those 2 tension points. So they'll trigger the tension table again. Should. But anything that I've ever found is that if you give someone a mechanic that they can abuse or use, they probably will. So it avoids that part completely. It's just like, all right, this is just how many you get. And then once you hit that trigger number, it goes off. Is it inelegant to keep track of 2 pools at once? Yeah, it's inelegant. Is it easy to use? Yeah, it's a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, honestly. Um, so that's one thing that I would like to either change and maybe, but we've talked about this part too, is the tension tables triggering at different levels. But that's just something we'll play around and play test with. Like every 5 tension points it triggers, every 10 it triggers, and all that stuff. But we'll talk about tension pools in just a second.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I agree that. Well, I guess I did miss one thing. You're tracking both of these. Did you mean that you are only triggering the tension pool once you've spent a multiple of 10? I think I missed exactly what you're keeping track of the spent ones for.
Sure. No, I'm only triggering it on every 10th one that I gain. And then I
Okay.
just need to keep a separate pool of how many that I spend for the difference of environment. So like I've gained 10 points,
Oh,
but
okay.
I've already
Okay.
spent 6, right? So that only leaves me 4 for my environment pool. So I have to keep
So
doing math in between.
really, okay. So maybe because I was about to agree, yes, that's a bit inelegant. Now that I'm understanding it a little bit better, there's maybe a different way to phrase or frame that that's a little more elegant, but I mean, it's not phenomenal. But frame that as current tension, however much you have available right now that moves up and down,
Mhm.
and like total earned tension, how much you've ever gotten that only ever goes upward.
Right. Yeah. And an easy way to handle this too that you actually mentioned last episode, which I want to look into as well, is like, well, every time you hit 10 tension points, you have to trigger the table. It costs something to do so. Maybe it costs 10. Maybe it just wipes those 10 out right then, and it sets the game master back to that level, so that way you don't have a runaway of tension points.
Right,
That may be
right.
something that we like. That is the most elegant solution, just right there. So maybe the tension table never gets triggered during an adventure, but see, I 100% want the tension table to get triggered a couple times at least, you know? So
Right,
we gotta
exactly.
gotta figure out the happy medium there. So that's something that I really want to look at for the playtesting. Now those are my lists for updates that I want to do to the rules. Do you have anything before I go into the next my next list?
Um, I think the the party kind of skill and check stuff was high on my list as far as maybe that needs tweaked. Maybe the incentives for exactly how and where points are awarded on that, which I already kind of hit this in the episode earlier, but that was high on my list as far as kind of reframing that as group stuff being more of a positive. Another item that I was thinking about, you're always holding up games that you've been reading and have handy. I've got one here. Finally, I've been going through one of my Zine Quest backs a while ago. Bounty Hunter, kind of a neat diceless system that's in this sci-fi world and whatever. But it rewards stuff differently for kind of phases of combat, kind of an initiative thing. It's a little bit as well, I think, like fast and slow actions in Shadow of the Demon Lord, which I totally love. So another thing I thought is maybe we play around with initiative incentives to earn tokens or not. So maybe it's split where like if you um, if you elect to, I don't know, combat maybe is split into three chunks, right? Like fast players, adversaries, and then slow players, just for names off the top of my head. If you elect to go very first as a fast player, you do not earn an adventure point. And the adversaries do whatever they're going to do. And if you elect to go after the adversaries, if you elect to be a slow player, then you get an adventure point for doing that. And maybe give the players a method with some agency for earning those points that is different, kind of moves that agency and the incentive on that to a different spot than the party versus personal skills that we were talking about before, and kind of how that frames the party skills in a negative light. Maybe that's more in addition to or instead of or something, that it becomes in your conflicts and combats, like how you approach that problem, how kind of out there your character is in that situation.
I love that you're bringing up the initiative stuff, and I think that's really interesting. I just got into initiative discussion on another Discord, uh, and it was interesting. Like, it was just a general question, like, "Hey, how do you guys like your initiatives?" And I also want to point out in this game for using the tension engine is that it's not just physical combat, right? It's social interactions, it is the battle of wits. It is physical confrontations, and in this one as well, it's going to be like your wizardy magic mental sort of stuff, right? Your Paul Atreides and the weirding way and stuff like that. Um,
Mhm.
is that how initiative works? And I was shocked to say this when I was writing out, partly because I've just been playing Party First so much, is that the adversaries just always go first, period. Unless you take an advantage that lets your character go first. But it's just going to be one person going before all of the bad guys, and then the party gets to go. And I'm kind of realizing that I dig that. It's easy, it's simple, some more tension because the bad guys get to hit first, right? That's always, I think that's good. I like that point of tension. Now, that being said, I also love the idea of let's make a game of it. We're making a little mini game of our initiative because someone made this point that I thought was interesting. Was the reason they love how Dungeons and Dragons does their initiative is that it's that iconic line of saying roll for initiative, right? You're
Yeah,
out
yeah, yeah.
here, you're doing your thing, and all of a sudden roll for initiative, and then like it's the zoom into the map, and now the battle music's going off in the background, and you're all, you know, it
Yeah.
sets up.
The SRD, or the Final Fantasy battle transition, world map to random enemy encounter. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they were
Dun, dun,
talking
dun,
about
dun, dun,
that.
dun, dun, dun.
They were talking about that, and I was like, yeah, yeah, that's pretty neat. I love then the idea of making a mini game for these conflicts because we want to let people know we're now going to be doing something a little bit different now. And I think that's an okay thing to do in the simplest form. So I really enjoy the idea of like, well, why don't we spend points for it? You can spend some amount, you can spend none and just you're going to go last, and that's fine. Or you can spend points to try and beat whatever the adversary, and adversaries will always have a set number. or the GM's got to spend on it. Don't know which, but we'll start there. I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Spend for initiative. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Now, something that I know we talked about briefly. Um, so getting over to the goals for the game, one of the first things I wrote down is that making a game for the GM, which using the tension engine, it already is that, right? The GM gets to play along with the players by spending points to do certain things. It makes it one of the more rewarding things you can do while you're playing because you get these different levers to pull, right? And that's like when I'm writing adventures, I want to give really cool levers for the GM to pull. Like if you build up enough points, like, you know what? Yeah, let's do an avalanche, right? You can always do that narratively if you want to, but in the adventure structure, I want it in a certain way, I guess. Now, one of the things that surprised me when I was asking the the players, like when you bring up initiative, so I said, like, hey, what are some of the things you want to get updated? One of the things we talked about already was the environment checks. But I
Mhm.
said, like, well, what do you guys think about the combat system? And these guys are old school D&D players for many, many years. And, Dungeons and Dragons is a lot more granular. You roll for the initiative, you add your pluses here, your minuses to crunch down to a number for a single die roll. They love this combat system as is. They didn't want to change it. They're like, it's really fun. I like how it's so deadly right off the bat. And we've had some epic longer fights, and we've had some, oh, that dude just got one-shotted. And it was highly satisfactory for everyone that was playing because to get the one
Okay.
shot, things have to happen. So combat is done great in this game. It really is for the adversary role conflict. It's fantastic, just to let you know.
Awesome.
It's a great job.
I'm, I'm glad to hear that because definitely that type of old school D&D like demographic, I would have been afraid it's not crunchy enough for them, basically. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear they've had a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised too, and I was glad to stick with it. So yeah, just to give you that information. All right, so now as far as the goals, like making a game for the GM, that's spending tension points for it. I was hoping to go for this, but as soon as I found out that they really like the combat to work how it is, I wanted it for the GM didn't roll any dice at all. I was going to look at changing it to a table that I've already put together. If it's an easy check, it starts at 5, and then it goes up by 4 at each one that you take. And I figured it out by average of the dice that you roll and that you keep of D6s. So it always starts at 5, and then you can spend tension points to ratchet up to the next level. With each of the environment checks is capped at some level. Is this a hard check? Is this an easy check? Is it a normal check or whatever, right? Now, what I don't like about that is it's a little bit like the fate system. And from the people that I've talked to, the fate system can get a little clunky at times, apparently. I haven't played it. I can't make that um,
Yeah,
comment. I really don't know. I need to play it to get more into it. Um, but it sounds like they
it's
said
been
it
quite.
runs. Yeah, they said it runs a little bit similar. So I don't know if that's something we want to go into. So no GM dice rolling. I don't think that's can happen. But it was a goal. What do you think?
Yeah, I, it's it's interesting. I mean, and I definitely know that is a design trend that certain kind of schools of thought, so to speak, really like, and I think that could maybe work for environment stuff. I feel like at least with the way adversaries are currently set up, that is less interesting. I'm not going to say it's impossible. Like you could just
Yeah.
operate off of, hey, if this adversary has, you know, 2 power, then you have to beat 8 or whatever the tally is, or remove that abstraction entirely and just inflate the adversary numbers to be whatever the target would need to be.
Right.
But something about that in this type of game with kind of a more centralized, like forward-looking progression, like it feels less weird to me in, say, something with kind of some more like retrospective stuff or shared GM-ship, like Forged in the Dark, or like, I mean, obviously a no dice, no masters game is not going to have dice, but like in stuff like that, it makes more sense to me, but it feels, obviously this is without playing, but from an adversary sense, that feels so flat to me.
Yeah, I don't think it's a goal I'm going to be able to fulfill at all, because I think the adversary thing for those conflicts is fun. You get to roll, the players get to roll, and you haggle back and forth, and not haggle, but you kind of
Oh,
negotiate how you
that's true.
spend your
That
points.
kind of
That's part of the game.
removes some of the haggling and the kind of interest, and it also removes some variability in how many points that you'll need to spend, say as a GM. How many points of tension you might need to spend to make something formidable. Say your pool is 5 dice, and you roll a bunch of 1s and 2s, and suddenly you're looking at this situation and going, oh, crap, you know what, I think I'm going to have to spend 3 tension and just keep all of these dice, versus some scenarios where you have a great roll, everything's 6s, right, and you just keep 2 of those and you run with it. That keeps a variability in the economy that makes it seem more exciting to me, at least spitballing this here, versus if you're just looking at those steady kind of difficulty breaks, then you just always know it's X amount of tension here, there, whatever. I mean, there are benefits to that. I admit it makes a more predictable economy, but I like the excitement personally of it varying.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to probably end up with like a hybrid where the environment might be static, but the adversaries are still roll. I think that's what I'm kind of leaning towards right now. Something that we had talked about for a goal of mine is for the tension tables. I want to expand the tension tables as they are to not only affect what's happening right now, but the players can choose a little bit like I guess maybe Blades in the Dark, but I'm thinking more like Night Witches, where the idea is okay, the tension pool triggered. So something bad's going to happen. It just is. And you can choose it to either affect you can have it affect the adventure that you're on, or you can have it affect a long term thing, which gets into my next goal, which is to have an ongoing world constantly. And
Okay.
if you choose the long term, then I add it to the clock. And right now I've got 3 things on there for conspiracy, sabotage, or militia that's going to be happening against your house or something like that. And if you don't go on a mission to stop one of those 3 things, or however many you have out there, then that's just going to happen to your house. You're going to affect the bad things. So it pushing it off on the long term, you'll never see those results until it's way too late, you know? um,
Right.
and I don't know if this is the way to do it with the tension table not being immediate. Um, but it adds into a total ongoing world that I really
Yeah.
love. So I
I,
got to figure out the balance there.
I thought about that when you said it, about like maybe you eliminate the immediate tension entirely, and push that off to, if you've got, say, kind of 3 of those clocks, tension tables, whatever you want to name the concept, narrative tables or whatever, running at once, then it comes down to not necessarily an immediate break in and the oh crap, what's going to happen now moment, but it makes everything kind of that long term. Oh no, like which one of these fires are we going to ignore for the moment while we're focusing on whatever we're doing currently? Um, I I agree with you that yeah, that might need to kind of play that out and see if that makes everything too distant until that oh crap moment. But tentatively speaking, I kind of like the idea, and I kind of like. I feel like it sells some of the scale of the setting that we're looking at. It kind of
Yeah.
reinforces a base mechanical level that other things are always going on further out there in the galaxy. So yeah, I could kind of dig that.
I think because you described it that way, I think now I love it. Like, it's not just an idea. Now it's something like, right, we want this to feel vast and big and at the same time personal at other times. Like, I think that's a really interesting thing to put in there. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's one of the goals on there. I am gonna throw in there real quick. I've got like 10 to 15 minutes before I have to go get my daughter. So
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're probably already running long on this episode too, compared to our goals.
but
Yeah.
there's
If Mechanics 1.0 needs to be tabled, feel free.
well, I've just got three things left on here. One of them we've talked about already. The onboarding leads right into one of the goals of the pre-game pool establishing scenes walkthrough, which we've already talked about. This is where the players describe what the characters do before the adventure even happens. And we do what are called low risk, low reward roles. In the and it's all for role playing. This also helps out. You build your relationships that way and you roll some dice. This will help build up your adventure pool and also the game master's tension pool. And so mechanically, you build up these pools. Narratively, you build these relations and also what you're doing for the setting. That seems pretty simple. I know we've talked about it, and I know that I think we're both way into the idea.
I love it. Preview for listeners. We briefly kicked around the idea of doing a very short, couple hour AP actual play video of stuff that's in the SRD because there's probably enough there for a very basic fantasy game. So currently working on a real short adventure for that and totally stealing that idea for a one shot in particular. Like that's great.
Yeah, I love that idea, and it'll be hopefully pretty simple to put together. Now, this builds into the setting that we're talking about. So the goal is to build a house or a group, basically, or a society or something like that, that the party all belongs to, and that the players build it all together with a little bit of guidance from the game master, or not, or maybe they just build it completely. And this is I had this idea for a long time, and then my players asked me to run Blades in the Dark for them. We're gonna have our first starting of the campaign in about a month or so. So I started reading that, and I was like, I keep reinventing the wheel, and I'm trying not to do that. So
Yeah.
in Blades in the Dark, you choose what kind of gang you are, and that informs what kind of adventures you're more than likely going to go on, and you get some bonuses. I want to do the exact same thing, more or less, with this game. You build your house, you, and it's going to be like you're like a third party investigators to help out the government. You're like merchant marines trying to take stuff from one part of the galaxy to another part. All these different house ideas. I've come up with six major houses so far, but these are just kind of basic ideas. And one cool thing you get, not only does it kind of give you an idea of what your group's going to be doing most of the time, is that you also get a unity check that's specific only to this house. And I think mechanically that ties in with the setting really nice. We're looking for like that Game of Thrones kind of feel to it, kind of the Dune houses as well. Try to get
Yeah.
political acumen and stuff like that.
Yeah. I know we talked before a little bit about kind of house creation in the Green Ronin Song of Ice and Fire, which I think that rule set is kind of rebranded as Sword Chronicle these days since they lost that license. So I think that's something I'm gonna dig back into for some research. You mentioned Blades in the Dark, and that reminded me. I'm an idiot. It's somewhere over here on the shelf, but I've got Court of Blades, which is forged in the dark by way of political kind of Renaissance backstabbing, which like seems perfect for this sort of thing, and kind of the houses are a big part of that.
Okay.
That is so. I grab that and reread. You also mentioned not wanting to reinvent the wheel too much.
Yeah.
I've skimmed a couple of years ago the Year Zero engine that powers a lot of Free League stuff,
Yep.
and I noted I think some similarities, similar ideas and concepts, honestly, to the tension engine, which for clarity's sake, the tension engine was years before I ever read Year Zero, but I think I'm gonna dig in and reread that and see if there's some tweaks, twists, whatever that might be applicable that we might consider. So yeah, I think to some extent I'm kind of in reading and research mode at the moment.
Yeah, and it's important to do. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I also don't want to like create something and people are like, oh, it's just like this. And it's like, well, dang it.
Yeah,
Don't want that. There's some ideas that we're not going to be able to avoid for sure. Like building the houses is not new. I know that going into it. I don't want it to mechanically be the exact same as someone else doing it. But I
oh
also
sure,
really love the
sure.
idea of building layers in something ongoing that you can get more powerful to build up politically or however you want to do the direction. My last goal that we talked about already is I want to push the social standing combat more in this particular adventure or in this particular
Yeah,
setting. It just fits better, right?
agreed, agreed. Lots of negotiating and kind of spy conspiracy type stuff feels very Three Musketeers to me.
Yep. And that's something I built in there already. It's like one of the characters you can play is I call him the ambassador right now, but maybe the orator might be better. But they can use the dreaming or the weaving or whatever we call it, the forest type ability, as part of their compel skill to try and do it. And so these great speakers of these houses are very important, and you will get to duel with them over different um, fine points of law or philosophy. I've got a couple buddies who are philosophy majors, and it is dizzying back in the day when we would go down to our local bar and they would have all these philosophy people around and then just me, the English guy. And they would sit there and just talk about these crazy things for like hours on end. And it was just impressive how they were just going back and forth over this stuff. And I want that to be important. Like, and I would love for our world to have like, we get very excited over the Super Bowl and whatnot. Like, if we can do the Super Bowl of orators, like, let's do that. That sounds awesome.
For what it's worth, I love the name Orator as like a class or whatever, and a little. It feels a little more open than Ambassador. It could be more specific, like jobs in the universe, and it just sounds cool as heck.
So mechanically, those are my goals. Those are my goals in the little tweaks I want to make to the current system. The tweaks to the current system, um, I think mostly are going to be easy. I don't think there's any real thing on there. It's going to be the goals part of trying to implement these different functions into a game that don't currently support them. That's going to be the
Yeah.
real heavy lifting. But I also think it's going to be the most rewarding heavy lifting because I think the settings to the engine, to the tension engine system, are what's going to set it apart. Like, I know we're just going to do this fantasy thing, but if it goes well, you know what's going to happen, right?
And we're gonna want to flesh out a whole fantasy world.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know when we were spitballing ideas around, you did say something about like, oh, like what about some kind of dark fantasy? And immediately I was like, oh, yeah, okay, wait a minute. What if there's a magical plague and all the gods have gone crazy, except there's one who's not totally crazy yet, but already afflicted, and you're like chosen by them, and like some of the point interplay and like the skill choice, like rather than like party versus personal, maybe it's like personal versus like divine influenced, but like
Ooh,
there's
yeah.
a there's a worry about the more you lean on it, because like this is the last remaining god that's trying to get you to like help solve this problem, but like they're going crazy too and are not reliable, and like, oh man, there could be some fun stuff with
Which
that.
is a beautiful interplay with the tension table, then, right? When it goes off, it's you did anything bad. It's just, the gods are crazy. I saw that movie. I know what's
Yeah,
up, right?
exactly. Oh man, dang it! Now I'm gonna go down that rabbit hole too.
Well, if you end up on Kickstarter and there's two tension engine games that are out there, back them both, right? We're working hard here.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. I need to go get my kiddo. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this episode. I know we're doing in batches right now. We tried to fool the audience here by changing up our appearances slightly. We're going to see if it worked if they're watching the YouTube video.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. And we'll talk soon. And thanks everyone for listening.
Till next time.